Hello, everybody coming in. It's so good to see you all. If you are able to turn on your cameras, we'd love to see your faces. And of course, since many of you are family caregivers and you may be with a loved one now, if you can't turn on your camera, we completely understand. So thank you for being here. Welcome to the final session of Reimagine and RCI's three-part series, Cultivating Caregiving. My name is Andrew Engel, and I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. For those who may need a visual description of me, I am a white cisgender male with glasses, salt and pepper hair. I've got a black shirt on today with beautiful multicolored dots. I've got some light pouring into my right, and I've got an orange wall behind me. I live in New York City, also known as Lenapehoking, which is the land of the Lenni Lenape peoples, past, present, and future. During the colonial era and the early federal period, the US removed indigenous communities from this region, but some also remained among the continuing historical tribal communities. I acknowledge the native territory where I am to remind myself that more steps are needed to undo generations of damage caused by colonialism and white supremacy. Please let us know where all of you are zooming in from. Today, my colleague Nicole Tan is providing some assistance with this gathering. Thank you, Nicole. I want to tell you a bit about Reimagine. Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community, people of different backgrounds, ages, races, people of different faiths, people of no faiths, all coming together to heal ourselves, our communities, and the world. We support each other in facing adversity, loss, and mortality in order to transform life's biggest challenges into meaningful action and growth. Reimagine's resources, support groups, events like this one today are free and accessible to the public. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those who already made a tax-deductible donation when you registered for today's program, I want to thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard parts into purpose and action. And we're all about action today. And if you're looking for another wonderful organization that focuses specifically on advocating on behalf of family caregivers, look no further than the Rosalind Carter Institute. They are the co-host of this series, and you'll hear more about RCI in just a bit. I want to give you an overview of what the format is going to be for today. It's designed for you to take action, small, sweet steps towards transformation. We've got 35 minutes of discussion with our guest speakers and more about them soon. We've got 10 minutes of Q&A that follows. Please use the chat as you listen to our speakers. If you're starting to formulate questions, we'll try to collect those for the Q&A portion. And then after that, around the hour, you'll have an opportunity to join small, peer-led, prompt-driven breakout rooms. So stick around for that. I want to also share a few Zoom tips for you. For those who wish, you can click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen to get a live transcript of what's being said. Click on the three dots in your Zoom window to get a transcript of the chat. That can be saved. And if you're having any difficulty during this call, feel free to send a private message to me or Nicole. We're going to try to help you. Another important note, this event is being recorded, and you'll be receiving a playback in our follow-up email with a bunch of resources from us and links. Okay, and now it is my pleasure to hand this over to Purvi Bhatt, President and Chief Impact Officer at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. Purvi, what a joy it's been working on this with you. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand this over to you.
Well, thank you, Andy. And it's just such a pleasure to be here on behalf of Mrs. Carter and her legacy and the RCI, and candidly, on behalf of our total community. You know, I know one of the first things we want to do is just walk us through what we've learned as the two prior sessions that we've had so that we can bring everybody up to speed. And it's been unique for us to really bring a couple threads together, which are around care and anticipatory grief and grief, how all three of those experiences have often been presented through the challenge, and that's very, very real, but also the joy and how we come together. And I think today is going to be a really important conversation about that. Our first session when we came together taught us a few things. First of all, you know, Andy and I worked really hard to see what we could do to ensure that there was cultural inclusion and ensuring that all voices could be at the table, ensuring that we just opened the funnel to hear what is happening across our experiences. And we've gotten just a groundswell of reaction that we've seen across social media, even in the chats that were happening in that first session, to say it felt very different and felt very important that we could finally include different points of view on how we culturally come together. We all know that care and how we express it is deeply, deeply rooted in each of our cultures. Whenever we walk into anyone's home, no matter where you are in the world, by definition, you've entered another culture. And so it was really important to put voice to that. And so that, for me, was one of the biggest lessons. And that has unlocked a lot more conversation. And I think we're seeing more people kind of revisit these videos to be able to get that kind of relief as we're going through this experience. One of the other things that I really wanted to bring us back to is Mrs. Carter's now, I think, famous quote, which is to say that we are all in some form of caregiving. We're in some part of this continuum of caregiving. Either you've been a former caregiver, or that you're currently caregiving for someone, or you're planning to be caregiving for yourself or others, and you know that one day you're going to need one yourself too. And so recognizing that it isn't just that there are four types of caregivers, there are four kinds of people, and that's all of us. And so that, again, is one of the most inclusive ways of thinking about how we can come together. And I'll say that for myself, I am a former caregiver, I'm a current griever, and I'm also now a current caregiver for a variety of people now who are experiencing cancer. And I'll close in saying that it is very much a round robin. If you've been a caregiver before, you're likely to come back to being one, because you are offering that very positive place for people to be feel cared for. And Mrs. Carter also would say it's very generational. If you saw it happen in your family, or and it was a positive experience, you likely are going to be tapped to do it again. And I certainly am. So Andy, I don't know if there's anything from the second session that you wanted to cover in terms of lessons, but let me turn it back to you on that, and then we'll carry forward with our current speakers.
I'll try to be quick. We had an amazing workshop with Jessica Guthrie and Dr. Tony P. Miles, who is a scholar in residence at RCI. I thought it was a perfect blend of personal storytelling, interactive exercises, and we had time for Q&A. Jessica's been a caregiver for her mother, Constance, who now has late-stage Alzheimer's. You might follow her on Instagram or TikTok. And Jessica helped us to take steps towards shifting our mindsets as caregivers, to visualize where we want to be in the future. And I appreciated, you know, Parvi, you talked about joy. I appreciated how she talked about the gratitude about her role as caregiver, and recognizing the growth that she has experienced. At the same time, she wonders what her life would have been like, you know, had in her early 20s, had she been able to continue pursuing her career on this track. And I also appreciated what Jessica had shared. She said, as someone that is both a caregiver and a leader in this field, I rarely see panels, learning spaces that are led by BIPOC experts. This was one of the first times where I felt seen as a caregiver and a supporter of others on this journey by a large mainstream organization focused on caregiving. So we really appreciated that shout out, Jessica. So anyway, I'll pass it back to you, Parvi.
Great. Well, now we're excited about this conversation that we're entering into now. As I'm introducing them, please, in the chat, if you feel comfortable to do so, let us know what kind of caregiver and what kind of person you are within the context of that broad definition. Helps us get to know each other. Again, I'm a former and a current. And as I move forward, let me start with a quick introduction and then ask folks when they take the mic to also, our speakers to also let us know where you are in that continuum of care. So Jessica McGlory first. She's the founder and the CEO of Guaranteed, a startup that is really focusing on an innovative way to open up the experience of end-of-life care. Next to her is Neal Shah, also CEO of CareYaya Health Technologies, really bringing together generations and thinking through how we can come together more efficiently, again, with that connective tissue of care. And last but absolutely not least is Richard Lui, who I hope you know very well. He's a dear member of our community, but also not only today's moderator, but an award-winning anchor and journalist with MSNBC and NBC News. So I'm going to turn off my mic, hand over the mic to Richard, and to guide us through this next conversation on how we can take action. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Parvi, and thank you, RCI. Thank you, Andy, as well as Reimagine for this series. And I am always so glad to be parts of these conversations because, as both Parvi and Andy know, we can't do this enough. It's a big C in the caregiving space, and it's a great C. It's great to be on boats together as we find each other, bump into each other, and journey and find our different ways. Neal and Jessica, thank you for being here. Jessica, as we look at the topic space, let's take action from burnout to blossom. When you look at the idea of cultivating caregiving, what does that mean to you personally, Jessica, first? And then you, Neal, after. And then you're doing some amazing things. And that's the understatement of the morning, I'm sure, in what you do day to day. So Jessica, why don't you start with that? What is this? Where are you at in this idea of taking action in burnout to blossom?
No, definitely will. I'm really excited to be here to chat with everyone today. So thank you to all the team for having me. But when I think about caregiving and sort of my journey right now, I'm at the former caregiver stage. I was a caregiver to my dad while he had a double heart attack and then would pretty rapidly decline and need to go into hospice care, where I became his main caregiver and focused on his end-of-life healthcare journey. I at the time didn't know I was a caregiver. If you'd asked me, I would have just said I was a daughter. I didn't know that term applied to me, but I learned a bit later. I didn't actually learn until a couple of years later when someone was talking to me about how I was starting a company that was going to be focused on being able to make sure that there could be a better end-of-life healthcare experience for all, including the people who have to love and take care of them. And the person said, "Oh, like you were a caregiver." So I think about that sort of journey of which that I've come from. I really start to think about where it started, which was me not even knowing I was the very thing that I was trying to help empower when starting this company.
What were you doing before you became a caregiver?
Yeah, before I became a caregiver, I was working for tech and direct-to-consumer brands. Usually, I was very early stage employee working with the first 10 employees, working with founders, helping them reach their dreams. Had a lot of fun being able to do that. And in reality, I even did it while caregiving because I didn't really know or understand why I was so exhausted. I just was like, oh, well, I'm
I have
tired,
no
but
idea why. Yeah.
yeah, I had no clue why, but that was very genuinely, I thought, I have my job and then I'm caregiver and then I'm helping my dad. But in reality, I had two jobs that were with one of them being 24/7. So that's kind of how that played out.
Awesome. Neal, how about you?
Thanks again, also everyone, for having me. Similar to Jessica, actually, interesting to hear your story. I also suddenly became a caregiver, starting in my early 30s. First for my grandfather, as he experienced dementia and cognitive decline, kidney failure, dialysis, and then end of life care. There I would say I was secondary caregiver. My mother became primary caregiver suddenly, and I observed the toll it took on her. And I was kind of like the helper research guy. to help. And then right as that experience ended, I observed the toll it took on both myself and my mother. Then I became primary caregiver as my wife went through a severe battle with cancer that lasted several years, including multiple hospitalizations, a medical coma, several failed therapies, multiple failed surgeries. And I had to leave my career to become her full-time caregiver, which took an enormous toll on me. And that really inspired me to start what I'm doing now, which is CareYaya, which is a company to help other family caregivers get a break, because I see firsthand, how much impact it can have on people when they can't get good care help.
I'll ask you the same question. Before you became a caregiver, what was that intensity and the drive before that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Before that, I was kind of like I'm a pretty introverted, bookish person. I was like a whiz kid when I was younger, and then I became a finance guy. I was working in New York City, working in the private equity and hedge fund industry. Rapidly rose up the ladder. By my late 20s, I was managing a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of investments across healthcare and technology at a large fund where I became partner. And then by my early 30s, one of the investors there backed me to start my own fund. So I started with that one investor's 10 million of capital, and by 35, I was running 250 million, which was kind of cool, from like a middle-class kid coming from nowhere. I was on this super trajectory working, I'd put in 80-hour weeks for my whole 20s and 30s to achieve that pinnacle of my career.
That's all?
And then have to tap out. Yeah, to just tap out to become a caregiver. It was very, psychologically, it was devastating. But, I felt like it was my duty and obligation. And I think that actually by becoming a full-time caregiver, I ended up steering my wife towards a successful outcome that might not have otherwise happened.
What are you two doing? This doesn't make sense. The two businesses that you've now endeavored to take upon yourself. And I'll just share a little bit about my caregiving background. I wrote in our chat that I was a former caregiver, now a current caregiver, and like Parvi will be needing a caregiver. In fact, I'm sitting in San Francisco in my childhood home, where I'm back for a caregiving shift after we finish our discussion today with my mother, who just got out of the hospital. I myself became a caregiver 8 years ago, and I live in New York. I'm a news anchor and broadcast journalist, and I was so used to being called at any moment to cover any story that my boss would send me to, from more recent times with George Floyd to, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Maryland, to mass killings in Europe. And I had to change my work career which was not necessarily what people like myself ask for, is to be on TV less. But I did that, and my boss was so kind, and I thought she was going to say, see you later. You're a great guy. When you're done taking care of your dad, give us a call. Instead, she let me work 3 days a week, and so I would fly from New York to San Francisco, where I sit today, to care for my father in this very building for 6 years, 3 times a month. And so I also had this shift all of a sudden. And that's what brought me into then doing two movies on caregiving that were Oscar qualified in the end, and became what we think to be the most widely distributed films of the time. And so when I ask you, what are you doing? I also kind of get the understanding as what it can do to you. Like, what am I doing? What is this whole thing? And what is this whole new thing, Jessica, that you're now into? And I'm very excited about your business model. Tell us about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, at Guaranteed, we're really focused on redefining and changing the way we see end-of-life healthcare in the US. It's probably no secret to a lot of people. We really actively avoid talking about dying and death. And that we feel helps it to not happen. But I think we all know in reality that it's going to happen, whether we think about it or not. And it's typically a bit better to be prepared when it does happen, and to be able to have great support with pain management and comfort care. So at Guaranteed, we first started with a tech-enabled hospice care model, where we figured, hey, we want to make sure that people can die where they would like, which is typically at home. Most would prefer not to be able to die in a hospital. So how do we make sure that they can be at home with their loved ones, be able to be actively engaged with their loved ones as much as possible, instead of focusing on fighting pain every single day just to be able to have another extra day. So that's what we've built, and we've been able to have our launch be able to actually be a direct hospice care provider at home, use our technology to make it easier for caregivers to understand what's likely going to happen through the process based off of the different sort of data points and information that we have for the patient. Make sure the patient has the advocacy for the different things that they would like and want to be able to do in their final days, weeks, months, or years even. Some folks don't realize that they can be in hospice for even longer. We do know right now, former President Carter is in hospice care, and it's really wonderful that he's receiving pain management and comfort care. So our focus is to make sure that it can be equitable and accessible to everyone in the US. So we first started in Southern California, but we are quickly and rapidly expanding more across the US. So that way we can make sure that anyone who chooses hospice care or is not even familiar with hospice care can become familiar with it, choose it when they feel empowered as a patient and a family together. And we're really excited to be able to continue to do that, even though we're still a bit of a new startup.
And how many times, if you could express that, Jessica, were you asked for your father, Jessica, would you like to consider hospice care? And what was your reaction initially? And how did that reaction change, if it did at all? Because that's often a question you don't want to be asked.
Yeah, definitely. For my dad, in reality, when I look back, he should have been on hospice care at least 4 months before he actually ended up in hospice care, just based off of some of the hospitalizations he was having. But hindsight's 2020. I had never heard of hospice care before. I was told by his cardiologist at that point. He said, hey, we really need to recommend he go into hospice care at this point. His heart capacity, he came in at 30%. He is now at 5%, and it's been a week and a half. That is not really something that we think is that's a great sort of option for us to try to keep doing things that aren't going to really extend anything for him. I will say that my reaction, I had already seen him, and when I saw my dad, I didn't see the person who was my dad that I kind of grown accustomed to. He looked to me to be incredibly, incredibly ill, and I didn't necessarily know that he was actively dying, but I did know that he was not where he used to be. And so I feel like I came into a pretty pragmatic mode. That's kind of my default, and said, okay, we need to get him into this hospice care, because it sounds like if he is going to die, at the very least, he will be able to have his pain managed and he can be comfortable and we can spend some time with him. That's really a lot better than in a hospital where we couldn't really have much time to have real conversations. So I know, but in my family, huge range of reactions and emotions, from those who were completely leaving and wanting to avoid the entire situation to those who literally fell on the ground crying. It was a complete range of emotions, and I think all of them incredibly valid. But I'm very, very glad, even though I feel like we could have had a stronger experience in hospice care, I'm glad we were able to get him home and be able to have that time with the family, because it's some of the times I cherish the most.
Yeah, thanks for sharing with that. I almost like you're reading my mind, all the range of emotions that I remember from my father. He was asked, the medical caregivers, the professional staff were asked many times, and I was almost you're wrong, we're going to fight you reaction. My mother, her RN, or her doctor's RN, came to visit her yesterday, and the nurse asked us that for the first time. And again, the reaction that we had was, I don't think you quite understand my mom's strength, is what my sister and my brother and myself, I know without saying, felt. But the first time is always a little jarring. And so I'm glad that you're bringing that up at Guaranteed. We're going to dig into your model a little bit deeper shortly. Neal, CareYaya, first of all, and I'm going to do this to you as well, Jessica, but what is CareYaya on the name first?
Sure. Thanks for the question. We wanted something to be kind of like it's to help family caregivers, and we wanted to kind of aging and caregiving and end of life, this whole care continuum to have like a positive connotation. A lot of these companies are named like visiting angels or comfort keepers, which kind of allude to kind of like death and pro or con, but we wanted something to be positive. So yaya is just the word yeah twice. It's fun to say, but also yaya means grandmother in Greek. Yaya means caregiver in Swahili, Hindi, and Thai. And it's an acronym for You Are Your Advocate, which we believe is the future of self-directed care. So the word had multiple connotations, which is why we chose it. So yeah, wanted to do a positive take on caregiving. It's something we're all going to go through.
Yeah. So tell us about what you do. What's my experience when I engage with CareYaya?
Sure. So, basically I wanted to create, out of my own like personal journey. I found the biggest gap in the care system was, the US has some of the best healthcare in the world. Best kind of machines, best drugs, best, surgeries, et cetera. And I think the US has one of the most lacking social care or home care systems in the world. That industry is completely broken. And, kind of from experiencing it firsthand, why I believe it's broken is because it's these localized companies with national franchisors that are charging families way too much and paying caregivers way too little. So all the money is being wasted to the company, which then goes into profits, sales and marketing, heavy amounts of advertising, local salespeople on the ground, and just kind of squandered. So families are not able to afford care. Now, cost of home care across the country for a full year for someone is pushing $60,000 a year, and then care workers are getting paid next to nothing, which is why everybody's leaving that industry. So CareYaya, like the whole premise was, how do we use technology to massively lower that administrative and middleman fee so care workers can get paid more and families can pay less? So we took an extreme position where we charge nothing, by the way. So it's a full social enterprise. There's no markup. Families can use us to book care, pay the caregiver directly. So caregiver gets 100% of what you pay. So it's in most markets we operate, it's 30 to 50% lower cost of care than anything else. The other innovation uniquely is it's a tech-enabled caregiving model where people can book care online, and the caregivers are all college students. So these are our future society's doctors, nurses, physical therapists, physician assistants. We thought that there's a huge untapped labor pool of people who cannot participate in the care economy because the care companies don't want them because they can't do full-time caregiving. But if you create kind of like a gig-like model where you can send them shifts and opportunities to do care flexibly around their schedules, they would be amazing caregivers, and they can help people out. And they have a natural incentive to do a good job because this is a pathway for them towards future clinical careers. So that's CareYaya in a nutshell, is a place where if you're a family caregiver, you need help, you go to the site careYaya.org, you can book in 2 minutes, and a nearby college student will come help you at rates that are highly affordable, and then you just pay them directly. In most markets, it's 15 to 20 bucks an hour. So, it's reducing cost of care by 30 to 50%. And it's encouraging and inspiring young people around the country to focus on these challenges and, hopefully create, better future clinical workers.
And is this all across the country? Are there some hot spots or warm spots where you have more people power?
Great question. Yeah. So it's spreading all across the country. We started at our home base in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. But right now, in the last 6 months, it really took off. After 2 years of heads down building it here, it's now started to take off. So we're all over Boston, San Francisco, parts of Texas. Actually, Purvi, we're all over Minneapolis now as of this week. San Diego, Colorado,
just for her, right?
Yes, just for her. Exactly.
Yeah.
We're going to help you out. So no, it's spreading everywhere. I mean, it's kind of like the spread is through students telling friends at other universities. So we went from the first year we had 200 people doing it. The next year we had 1,000 people doing it. In the last 6 months, now there's 15,000 college students across 30 universities across America. And if we can get this right, hopefully in the next 2 years, we'll have 100,000 students. There's so many students who want to do this kind of work, which is like really cool to see.
How can you do this for free?
Well, fortunately, through my prior career, I had socked away some savings. So I was kind of just funding it myself, but I can't do it unlimited. And then after about a year and a half of doing it, there were people in the healthcare ecosystem, mostly retired healthcare executives out of like the health insurance industry, public health fields, telehealth fields, who had just kind of like made a bunch of capital and were like, hey, they believe in the mission. So they kind of allowed us and they funded us to keep doing it for free. We've recently started getting grants from the National Institutes of Health, Johns Hopkins, other universities and funding organizations. And really the goal eventually, which is like my dream, is that why should the company take any money out of the care transaction? The caregiver is doing all the work. You're just kind of like matching. And then the family is having an affordability issue. So our vision is that if we can pull it off, other constituents should pay. So kind of employer, and I can talk about that, but like employers should be paying for people's care needs. Health insurance plans should be stepping up here. And really at long-term Medicare should be stepping up. Why isn't the government doing anything? So if we can pull it off, individuals will never have to pay a fee or markup. So that's kind of the vision. But for now, we've been generously backed by people who believe in the vision.
Super. Jessica, guaranteed. Why guaranteed?
Yeah, so with Guaranteed, the name actually came to me on the exact 2-year anniversary of my father's death. I was really sitting and for the first time in 2 years, actually really thinking about everything that happened because I avoided thinking about it for as much as possible. And all of a sudden, it just came to me, this idea that all of us, everyone, death is guaranteed for all of us, but a dignified death is not. And I wanted to create something that could guarantee a dignified death for everyone. And so that's how Guaranteed first came about.
Something that I will often say that, we really are good, us humans, at handling the arrival. We are not so good at the departure. And you were saying it earlier about our avoidance mechanisms that kick in. You were sharing your experience with hospice, me with as well. This is part of that, isn't it? Where we get good at the departure because we're all going to depart. And I was brushing my teeth last night in the bathroom I grew up in as I'm back here, visiting and caring for my mom, and I was thinking, I have to plan for this too, right? And culturally, I think we gather very well for the arrival, but boy, we should be gathering for the departure too, Jessica.
Yes. No, I completely agree. It's something that as a culture, we made a very conscious decision at Guaranteed to be pretty some would say blunt. I mean, when people see we should probably talk about death, we get immediate reactions as that being our kind of slogan, our tagline. But we wanted to have a little bit of tongue in cheek and of saying like we should probably talk about it, but we wanted to say death. And so that's why you'll typically hear me say death or dying and not necessarily passed away or lost. And it's nothing necessarily wrong with those euphemisms, but we just made a very conscious decision to say it. I know that over and over, I kept hearing from doctors that my dad was a very sick guy. And I did not even know what that meant. I was like, oh, okay, he's sick. I feel very sick if I have a stomach ache. But I learned that meant he was dying. And that sort of euphemism actually was really kind of damaging when trying to figure out what to do next until finally the cardiologist said, he is dying. Like, this is what is happening. But before that, kind of didn't really know. And even on the phone call where he, the doctor is like, hey, we have him here and, he's on this ventilator and that's kind of the only thing really working. And I'll never forget it. He said the last sort of phone call that I'd have with the doctor, he said, I don't know if you know this, but your dad's a very sick guy. And so even when my dad would then die hours later, because that only thing keeping him alive was a ventilator, it was still someone who couldn't say it. And so we choose to say it. We choose to do those different sorts of actions to help people kind of confront the avoidance, confront some of the feelings that people have where it's like, oh, this is so, so scary. And now we're even at a place where I don't know if others have seen it, but people who have parents or grandparents who are 90 years old and people are saying, oh my gosh, like, no, I'm not ready to let go. And that's okay to talk about, your feelings towards it. But before we would have thought, what an incredible long life. what an incredible journey to have had here. But now we're so just avoidant of it and so don't want to touch it. And so when I think about people living to 120, it's caused there to sometimes be a bit of friction that
Mm.
we seek to really help have people just have the realization that maybe the person will live till 120, but just in case, have some of those conversations, really be able to get into it, see what the person wants, let them be able to advocate for themselves now when they can, and let that be a reality. Because knowing at the end of the day, that is their last chapter. It is a huge part of yours too, but it's another chapter in your life where this is that person's last one. And so we really need to start to think about like, how should we let someone be able to let their story actually end?
If I engage with Guaranteed, what's my experience as a service product user?
Yeah, so today, since we are an actual direct provider of hospice care, usually the interactions come from some sort of referral coming from a doctor. And so the family would immediately be greeted by our care navigator and be able to sign up to be able to receive text messages from us, be able to interact and get sort of information based off of the data information of the patient if they select us to be the direct hospice care provider. And so we would get them home, make sure that they have all of the information that they need throughout the journey, however short or long that period of time is. And then afterwards be able to engage with us with bereavement care. We believe in consistently actually doing bereavement care over a lifetime. There is a 13-month sort of provision and benefit by the government that is required to be offered to families that go through hospice care. We think grief comes in waves, and so we do a lifetime membership where they can always interact and either call, text us, however feels most comfortable to them. But that's how it's today. Basically, over time, our big sort of vision is that we're going to be able to impact far more people beyond just us being the hospice care provider. So working with other hospice care providers out there who are doing incredible work, but perhaps are not able to build out their own technology in order to be able to better communicate with the patient and the families, in order to be able to actually synthesize all of the data that comes in to make a better journey. Because a lot of times if you are empowering these incredible clinicians and care workers with the data and information of what's needed at end of life, they can make even more informed decisions that can be tailored to the different individuals at further scale. So at the end user, our hope and goal is actually that they don't even really notice us. They barely notice us from a technology standpoint. It's already things that they already interact with, they already use. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It feels natural so that they can focus on what is supposed to be focused on, which is their loved one. That's our big hope and goal, is we barely are noticed from a technology sort of point of view.
By the way, folks, we'll be getting to your comments and questions in just a little bit. Keep them coming. And I wanted to go back to you, Neal, on this. You and Jessica seem to be very positive about something that some folks may not think is so positive. I just can feel your like good vibes, you know? Tell me about that. I'm like, how do we harness that and why? I mean, a lot of folks, as you, including myself, you know, caregiving tends to be negative, the first reaction or end of life or the departing, right? Is an immediate negative reaction. What's your philosophy for your business and for yourself quickly on staying so boosted, if I can use that word? Neal, how about you?
Yeah, Richard. Yeah, thanks for the question. I actually, for me, and also Jessica, thanks for sharing so much about what you do. I really love a lot of your explanation. I didn't know that's kind of what you guys did, and I really love the philosophy behind it. I would say, not to speak for Jessica, but I would say guessing similar to Jessica. For me, this is creating a sense of purpose and meaning of why things happen to me. So I'm finding the work is therapeutic because a lot of things happened to me in my life that were unexpected. And I think that this is my way of processing the grief and finding some purpose and meaning in it. So that's, I think, why one reason why I'm very positive, because otherwise sometimes you just don't have an explanation. Why did all these things happen to you? So and then the second reason why I'm very positive is I'm helping people suffering like me to try to improve their life. And I think that creates a lot of meaning as well, because we see firsthand in running CareYaya, our solution is like a pretty straightforward thing where we're just connecting them with affordable care and from caregivers who are doing a good job. And we immediately see the relief that a lot of the families we help left behind by the care economy. They can't afford in some of these cities like Boston, San Francisco, home care is 45, $50 an hour. I mean, who the hell can afford that? So whenever families hear, hey, there's an affordable solution, they were just doing it themselves, and people are about to tap out of their careers, which is no good for anyone. So I think that seeing the social impact is really, really motivating. So I think that keeps a positive vibe, and then really envisioning the future. I think that probably both of us in our industries are seeing how we can push to make change. And I would love to kind of get caregiving more in the public dialogue. I would love to remove the stigma around caregiving. I experienced this myself as a man in my mid-30s. When I became a caregiver, I didn't get a lot of support. I think people didn't really, a lot of my friends and colleagues didn't understand why I was doing it. A lot of people didn't want to hear about it, so I got excluded from a lot of like social activity because I was like the sad person talking about all the stuff I'm going through. And, everybody else was like having kids and starting their families. So no one wanted to hear about that. So I think that there is like a social stigma around kind of like what Jessica alluded to about death, about caregiving. I think it's like a very youth obsessed culture we live in, where people don't want to hear about these things that are just part of human life, that, maybe in other cultures would be just taken as a given. So I want to kind of like try to advocate for changing that, that these are just parts of the life journey and they should be celebrated.
Jessica, what's your philosophy on this quickly?
Yeah, definitely.
On staying, energetic and positive about this.
Yeah, I would say pretty similar. I mean, my dad died 8 weeks later, my grandma died, and then 4 months after that, my other grandma died. It was just kind of like thing after thing after thing that I was not really necessarily prepared for. And so just knowing what I went through, and I also went through different isolation. I mean, my like closest friends didn't even think to ask when my dad's funeral was to come. And and I saw my sister's best friends come. It was one of like, it was just this time where I had no idea what to do. And so I try to think about what I would have liked to have at that time. And I feel like with all of these people who, particularly I wasn't a caregiver for that long, just by the nature of how rapidly my dad declined. But there are those who've been caregiving for just years and years and years. And if there's one sort of positive force that they can have, be someone like myself or someone from my company, I really hope that we can be that, because we know that there's oftentimes they're not going to be able to have that elsewhere. And they know that someone has their back and really supports them through this, and understands it's not just the patient, but they're going through it too. And we want to help be a support there as best as we can.
I found in diving into this through our respective personal experiences that, people say, how do you rest? And, doing this and doing, the films and other activities around caregiving has actually been the exact thing I do for fun. Like I love doing this stuff. But some might consider it work, and I get the same feeling, at least from the two of you, that how do you process whatever the main stuff is became actually your main gig, number one, because that side stuff became so enriching to you. And I think that's really amazing what that energy has resulted in both of your two businesses. Again, we're short on time, so if you can answer in 30 seconds, please. Jessica, is hospice the right word? And if not, what is the right word for what you're trying to do?
Hospice is the right word
in terms of that space. It is.
Yeah, for us, hospice is the right word for what we do right now, but we are focused on the full end-of-life healthcare experience. We're just an early stage startup, but we do plan on being able to be there for people from serious illness all the way through bereavement. And so we think hospice needs to be redefined from a 6-month benefit that was kind of arbitrarily picked at 6 months years ago, to one that's a real journey and spectrum of how we can actually look at what happens in end of life, similar to how we look at pregnancy. There's a first trimester, third trimester, second trimester, care delivery, what happens after. We need to start thinking about it in a very similar fashion when it comes to end of life healthcare.
Perfect. Neal, caregiver and caregiving is a really clunky name. You got a better one for that?
I don't know. I don't really have a better one. I mean, we connect people with caregivers. I think frankly the caregiving journey needs to be redefined. That why is it so much falling on the family? Why isn't there societal support? Why aren't employers paying? Why aren't health insurance plans paying? When it's known to be both preventative from a health perspective, healthcare utilization, as well as keep people employed. So I think employers are starting to recognize this is a benefit they should offer. So yeah, I mean, our mission is just to connect people with caregivers, relieve the family caregiving burden. That's what we see is skyrocketing across society. We have an aging population. We have a population with skyrocketing incidence of chronic illness, and there's going to be,
Right.
I think 53 million people are caregiving for someone within their family. And I mean, I think there needs to be better societal support.
Underestimate.
And the best. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So just
So,
affordable help.
You two did not know this, but why not? You seem like you're up for a good conversation. If you ask a question of each other, Jessica, if you ask a question of Neal, since you're both entrepreneurs here, and Neal, you have 30 seconds to answer that question.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Neal, I'm curious, when it comes to the different caregivers, what's the feedback that you've gotten the most that you think actually would be impactful for everyone to hear?
Great question. The number one feedback we get is they love the intergenerational relationships and it feels like grandkids. And I think that's been really cool to see because of the way our society is now. A lot of times families are living away from each other, kids move away, grandkids move away. There's not a lot of interaction. So we're kind of building that social relationship back between the 20-year-old and the 80-year-old, let's say. And I think that's been like really cool to see that people really benefit from that intergenerational relationship, and it's mutually beneficial. Our today's younger generation is having a lot of mental health challenges because of lack of social connection, being kind of immersed into their phone. So by helping people in their community that are going through serious illness and relieving the family care burden, I think people are really finding, okay, there is a purpose to my life. I can do something positive. So the intergenerational leadership has been the number one bit of positive feedback.
Neal, your question of Jessica. Jessica, you have 30 seconds to answer.
Sure. I would say kind of in your dream, what would the end of life experience be like that your company could provide, as well as like broadly, like how would you kind of advocate for a societal shift so that 10 years from now, kind of what would the end of life experience in America be like?
Would love to be able to see that people can actually understand end of life as being a journey and phases over time, as opposed to this kind of hyper acute sort of moment that happens. The majority of us will not die in a sudden way, like a car accident. We are going to have it happen over time. And if we can be able to put in supports in place where everyone, whether you're in a rural area, whether you are part of the different communities that have a lack of access to end-of-life healthcare, most typically from different minority populations, whatever it is, everyone actually has accessible care that helps them through the process for the patient, the family, and the staff that takes care of them. That is what I see for end of life, moving it way more upstream, having those tough conversations, making them feel a little less tough as well, because it's just a part of life and something that we can celebrate, as opposed to always feeling like, oh gosh, this is the worst thing ever. It's not great a lot of the times, but it's not necessarily the worst thing ever. Let's celebrate it.
Yeah, and this conversation is the best thing ever. How about that? And so now we're going to move to Q&A. And to start it off, we'll start with Parvi Bhatt, again, president at RCI. And her question is about cultural backgrounds informing caregiving, how cultural backgrounds may or may not inform caregiving and the way we go about it. I'll go to Neal since Jessica just finished.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can speak to personal experience, but I'm from an Indian cultural background. I'm an immigrant to the country. My whole family moved here when I was a child. And that really influenced a lot about how I thought about caregiving and how our family navigated it, where it is like a family responsibility. There isn't really, kind of this idea of having external help. So both from my mother through my grandfather's illness, as well as mine, my responsibility then, and then for my wife, I felt a deep duty and obligation that I should do it myself, especially compounded by the fact that whenever I try to get outside help, it wasn't a great experience, and kind of the amount of guilt. So I think cultural background sometimes really informs how you think about caregiving. So that's been part of my journey, and the same with like helping other people kind of navigate these care challenges. I really think that we have a duty to each other, to take care of each other, and I wouldn't want to be, and nearing the end of my life, and not having family kind of be involved in helping out. So I'm trying to build something that I think can help people who, are stressing out and burning out from their own obligations.
Jessica, how about yourself?
Yes, I mean,
How would you? Yeah.
yeah, we see it all the time, honestly, in hospice, particularly when it comes to people from different backgrounds. There's a lot of different discussions around, I am meant to take care of my family member. And so I will not have someone else come and take care of my family member. That we see a lot of times culturally come through. We also see culturally some folks who have found families and, their family members who or blood or relatives are not actually the ones who are their family today. And so they have those found families and how to make sure that they feel a part of that sort of community and culture during this sort of phase. And those that even say that like, hey, no, there's a huge distrust towards the healthcare system for reasons that are completely valid within certain cultures, but actively can end up working at a bit of a disadvantage in hospice. So it's things that we see all the time that we really start to say, at least for us, we say it's not on the person and on their culture. It is about us figuring out a way to work within the culture and really make that be the sort of prevalent feature as opposed to putting the blame and onus on them and just say, well, they don't want it. That's not really how we tend to look at it. So that's kind of our sort of approach towards culturally competent care.
I have some questions that I already pulled from the chat, and some are specific to Neal and CareYaya, and I want to start with that. There were questions about if CareYaya is available to people with disabilities or chronic conditions or short-term health issues.
Yes, it's available to anyone that needs help and support. The only thing we can caveat to families is that while the students are well-intentioned and they're pursuing clinical careers, they're not able to do clinical activities during the care. So we don't have them do kind of like insulin injections or any kind of like anything that would be considered clinical work. But for anyone that needs a companion caregiver, yes. And while we initially socialized it as like elder care, dementia care, et cetera, we have people who are using it who are midlife people with disability. We have people who are using it who are parents of children or young adults with cerebral palsy, with traumatic brain injury, et cetera. We see kind of there are so many people that need care help and the family caregiver needs a break that basically if a well-intentioned student can do it, we would be happy to help. So it's available to anyone.
And there's a follow-up question, Neal, but I want to try to broaden this so that Jessica and Richard can also respond to this as well. How are these paid caregivers supported and supervised? And based on all of your experiences at Family Caregivers, I'm curious what you've seen in terms of what's needed in terms of support for paid folks who are coming into the home.
Sure, that's a great question. And that's something I've been actively thinking about and working on as our platform grew from like a couple hundred people that we were managing very closely to now like 15,000. So we did a lot of online-based trainings because we're not physically in all these geographic locations. We're actually building a robust caregiver training program with NIH and Johns Hopkins, which will be kind of like a AI-powered dementia care training that all the students can take. For now, they're trained through video-based modules. It's supervised actually pretty closely through each session is mutually rated. So the family and the student rate each other and we see all those. So we manage quality control that way where if people are not getting rated well, we follow up and see what's going on. Maybe we'll pause them doing caregiving until they can kind of upskill themselves. And then same, like families have to be very respectful of the way they treat caregivers. And I think that creates kind of like a cool ecosystem where a lot of these care companies will just like, I hate to say it, not to knock, some of these home care companies, but they will just staff a care worker and just make them go to a family. And then even if the care worker is saying, I don't want to go there, they'll be forced to. Our system works on mutual. The family has to choose and allow the caregiver to go. The caregiver has to choose and say, I want to go help the family. And no one has to we don't staff in a way. So it's like a platform where people get to choose, which I think creates like a much better care experience.
And Jessica and Richard, from your experience as family caregivers, what are the steps that are needed to ensure that these paid caregivers feel more support, get more support, and get the training that they need?
I mean, on our side, our team has a hospice sort of clinical model. So ours are primarily RNs, social workers, chaplains, or spiritual counselors. Those are the ones who are taking care. The family members who decide to take care of their loved one, we're very big advocates that they should be able to be paid, particularly by the government or health plans. That oftentimes is not happening. We see that kind of over and over again for the direct family member, or if they do, they have to go through so many different loops and all these different obstacles. And particularly in end of life, there's not a lot of time for people to do all of that. So we try our very best to be helpful there, but at least knowing they at least can trust and know that their RN, social worker, chaplain, they're basically their holistic care team is typically free for those that are in the US that have elected hospice care. So less than 1% of people, I believe, actually pay out of pocket for hospice care due to it being covered by all insurances. And if someone isn't on insurance, you can usually get a medical emergency waiver for hospice care across Medicaid or Medicare.
You know, Andy, for the two movies, I followed 20 families for better part of 7 years, some for more stops, some for fewer stops, and all across the country in every major region. And all the families felt alone, this both emotionally as well as tactically. And I think those are the two opportunities that I think we have in the market space. If we have $1 trillion untapped market, how do we help that market get tapped by great thinkers and doers like Jessica and Neal, right? And I do believe that one of the ways is to help them tactically not feel like they're creating systems alone. And therefore, we need more businesses that are localized, like Neal's and Jessica's, to become more localized. And they need the data to be able to provide the products and services on, and I mean micro levels, one-to-one levels. So me right now here sitting on 16th and Gary in San Francisco, how do I get and feel like they're there for everything I'm about to do when I finish and I walk downstairs and take care of my mom? So I think that's the opportunity there, because regardless of space, of cultural background, of region, of age, of economics, and this is why Bradley Cooper's coming out with his movie on caregiving on PBS for that reason. Like he will tell you, here I am, a movie star. I've theoretically all the access to resources, but so I think that's the opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Jessica. And thank you, Neal. And thank you, Parvi. I know some of our speakers have to go now, but I just want to express our gratitude to them for taking the time with us. Neal, thank you for pasting your email in the chat. Jessica, if you want to share contact information too. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions, but perhaps some of those can be addressed with our speakers. We are now going to move into our breakout portion of this event, so please stick around. So first, just a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
All right, take care. So I'm now going to prepare you to enter our breakout rooms. We're going to do this for about 15 minutes. Please be mindful of the time and make sure that everyone in your group has had a chance to share. And I want to remind everyone, this is not about giving advice to others. This is about active listening and sharing your own experience. Nicole will be pasting instructions in the chat for those who may need help when you're in the breakout rooms. And you may want to copy and paste those when you see them in the chat. We'll come together at the end. We'll say goodbye. And I'm now going to offer you a few prompts, which I will also broadcast while you're in the breakout rooms. But maybe, Nicole, you can paste these prompts in the chat. The first question is, what is your greatest challenge as a caregiver? The second question is, what action, even a small, sweet step, can you take to transform grief and struggle into growth? So let's get into it, okay? Thank you all for sticking around.